All right, so this is based on Nokodemion. Well, you're going to find out who Nokodemion is. And as the time goes on, you'll find out more. And hold your questions, please. Okay. Oh, and I guess I have to get this changing of the slides here. Let's go on. Here we go. This is the book that most of this information is based on. This is a book that Bernadette Brand, who's one of the core group members, very close to Billy, wrote. And she gathered this information from Billy, from various contact notes, etc. So that is the translation of the title of the book. Can everybody see that okay? All right, good. And that is the back. This book cannot fully illuminate the person of Nokodemion, and he remains what he was over the millions of years for the descendants of his peoples, a figure who occupies an absolutely individual status in the history of the universe, an enduring monument, therefore, which the human being can attain if he or she opens himself, herself, for the consciousness of the truth in their inner self and begins to implement and live this consciousness. So that's pretty amazing. And the other part of this presentation is based on new information that came from Christian Freiner, which was a booklet he compiled arising out of many questions that came from people reading this book and seeing things that didn't necessarily always line up. So lots of questions were raised, and this booklet was done, and I spent the last year translating it and have now incorporated it into this new version of this Nokodemion presentation. So, we're going to just take it back a little bit. This is talking about the Big Bang. As you can see, it happened about 40 trillion years ago. The next few slides will be just a brief overview with some new information as to the unfolding of our material universe in order to contextualize Nokodemion's evolutionary lineage. And so we start at the beginning. And the Big Bang was the birth of our new creational universal consciousness, which is what creation can be termed as. And it's the lowest form of a creation. There's many creations, which this presentation isn't going into all about creations, but we are the lowest form. And our creation came out of an area called the absolutum, suffice to say. And we have a twin creation, and both creations will continue to expand, and the material belts will continue to make new galaxies and solar systems until they reach an age of approximately 155.5 trillion years, and then will contract. Will contract for the same 155.5 trillion of years. Each creation consists of 7 distinct belts. The 4th belt is the material belt. That's where we are. And the material belt itself consists of 7 different space-time dimensions, each with its own array of physical planets, stars, galaxies, nebulas, and dark matter. Our universe is one of these space-time dimensions of the 4th belt of our creation. And we call our dimension the DERN universe. We know that another dimension is called the ANKAR in our universe, in our creation, material belt. Christian Freiner wrote in an email August 5th, 2019, saying that our DERN universe is very scarcely populated by human beings, contrary to the ANKAR dimension in which the Plejaren live. And it's the same place where the ancestors of the Chinese and Japanese peoples originated. Furthermore, Christian explained in an email dated September 13, 2019, that each of our space-time dimensions has a comprehensive/overall dimension, which consists of countless dimensions of past and future, which is limited by the Big Bang and the expansion/contraction turning point of the creation. Within these countless dimensions, time travel is possible. Our comprehensive dimension is called Goran, and the one belonging to ANKAR is called Siras. This is stated by Quetzal in Contact 207 of March 17, 1986. The ancestors of the Chinese and Japanese and other extraterrestrials changed from their dimension to this one through a dimensional portal. And actually, the Plejaren found this dimensional portal when they were actually chasing what was to later be our moon. When it went from the ANKAR, it suddenly disappeared, and they were researching where did this go. It somehow, what was to later be our moon, went through that dimensional portal, and that's how they found it, and that's what brought them to the Earth for the first time about 22 million years ago. And Earth was really not inhabitable at that time. So there's a whole long history about that, which we're not going into right now anyway. So, what we have recently found out through a further explanation by Billy is that life in our material universe goes through 49 billion year cycles of being and not being, which seamlessly transition into and out of material existence in the fourth material belt. As explained by Christian in an email communication with him about this, the information about the renewal of the universe every 49 billion years has the effect that life forms develop and evolve into the pure spirit levels, which are human beings, or are dissolving into neutral energy, which is animals and plants, etc. But the developing and the dissolving process of the celestial objects, like the suns and the galaxies and the planets, that lasts longer. And it needs several of these 49 billion year cycles for that to occur. But during this long process, there's a constant replacement process occurring, which can be compared to a rose plant disappearing in winter and coming to thrive again in the spring, or the human being who replaces their own cells every 7 years or so throughout their life. During the gradual and seamless transitioning, physical life of the universe ceases to exist, and in between that, after that time, there's about 3 billion years of rest or dormancy between the physical existences, and the new life forms of all genera and species, and subsequently humans, flourish again. So one may ask, where are we at now? How far along are we? And it turns out that we are about 17 billion years into our current 46 billion year of life existence. So only 29 billion to go, folks. Got some time. So, star systems, planets have come and gone already, and I would hazard to guess probably galaxies as well. However, given that various nebulas, star systems, galaxies have durations that extend across many of these 49-year cycles, there are systems out there that existed before our current 17 billion years, of course. For example, our own Milky Way galaxy is 810 billion years. I don't know how many 49-year cycles that is, 49 billion, but ours is 810 billion. And our Earth started forming about 646 billion years ago. So that's just the gases starting to coalesce and blah, blah, blah. But organic life did not occur on Earth until about 5 billion years ago. So, let's get into Nokodemion. On page 45 in her book, Bernadette Brand states that about 10 billion years ago, in the universe of the creation universe consciousness, humans first appeared on various planets who, as such, already disposed of a consciousness evolution, which are beings that have developed to a certain point where creational spirit forms can now enter and can incarnate for the first time and begin their evolutional cycle through many millions of reincarnations. Yeah. And about 380 million years before these first humans, Nokodemion spirit form incarnated, or I should say after these first human beings started to incarnate 10 billion years ago, Nokodemion spirit form came into existence and incarnated for the first time, and it began its long journey. Nokodemion's story begins, as I said, 9.62 billion years before Emmanuel, on a distant galaxy that existed in one of the other 6 space-time continuums belonging to our material belt. Probably Arkan, but we don't know. That galaxy was called the Lyran system and was 3.8 billion light years away from ours, where our home is here in the Milky Way galaxy. And though it was in a different dimension, there seems to be a way that they have to do these measurable distances that can be attributed between point A and point B. That, I'm not sure how that works, but that's what it is. So in the Lyran galaxy was a star called Waron, which had a planet called Sadir. This was the first planet where human life developed, those 10 billion years ago, and is the very same one where Nokodemion spirit form incarnated for the first time, that 9.62 billion years ago. Thus, in the almost 400 million years before Nokodemion, that's how the other human beings were already living. To his life. I don't know why I picked this slide, but it's just how I'm imagining it was, but maybe it was more technological by that time. Anyway, before he incarnated as the first Nokodemion, his spirit form lived countless lives in which he evolved, as we all do. He lived to be 1,763 years in that first lifetime. His name had a meaning. It meant immaculate, valuable one. And he began to work on and to develop the spiritual teaching. This teaching had developed since the beginning of his own learning and self-teaching after he had come to the acknowledgement of the creational natural laws and recommendations and their principles of operation. The unfolding of his lineage was to encompass 4 different time spans over the following 9.62 billions of years. And that'll be covered a bit later in this presentation. After countless reincarnations of the first Nokodemion spirit form, it was once again enlivened with a human being also named Nokodemion. This Nokodemion's lifespan was 2,500 years. This is when he set down the foundations of the prophetic teachings and as the first herald began the work of the spreading of the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, and teaching of the life, as well as the recognition and implementing of the creational natural laws and recommendations to peoples wherever he went. And so, he was an esteemed teacher, and now over millions of years, the personalities bearing the Nokodemion spirit lineage brought together many people who were from the far distant descendants of the Ur peoples, from going back to the times of his first Nokodemion and many lives in between. And these Ur peoples and many, as well as many new personalities, gathered around him from out of their own free will, and to whom he openly declared who he was and who he then taught and who would work with him in the mission to spread the spiritual teaching. Just before the last half of his last life, I guess, as Nokodemion, 2,500 years of his 2,500 years, he started creating his own people, and this creation of his own people was done through normal biological reproduction, through spiritual teaching and leadership, as well as through cloning. There are many misrepresentations circulating that he created the spirit forms, but that's not possible. Only creation does this. Most of those termed as the new spirit forms or newly created human beings meant those who he taught and who had overcome their old barbaric modes of thinking and general unknowledgeableness. So this intensive teaching was successful for those who were more developed, as you can see, and less successful for those who didn't have the benefit of experience. So the goal of this intensive teaching and his ultimate hope was to expedite his people's spirit forms in their evolution and shorten the required time in their spirit forms' reincarnational cycles. This so-called crash course in the spiritual teaching resulted in a very quick and increased theoretical knowledge. However, what was missing for the relatively new spirit forms was the accompanying experience with it, that goes with it, and through which one develops essences of wisdom from one's own experience. So, and without the wisdom, a further evolvement was subject to hindrance for these people. They lacked the consciousness evolution that comes out of the years of particular instinctual, intuitional, and knowledge-based experience, which a natural evolutive building upon past learning provides. This spawned uncertain and uneasy future possibilities for them and their descendants, and thus there were many who couldn't be turned around and who fell back into depravity and barbarism. So altogether, it took Nokodemion spirit form a total of 52 million years of evolution in physical lives before the spirit form was able to pass over into the next level of evolution, which is called the half material, the half spiritual level, known as the High Council. The average time for human spiritual evolution in the material planes before reaching the High Council, the half physical, half spiritual, is about 40 to 60 million years, just for your information. And interesting side note, according to the planet and the people and the evolution of individual peoples, there lie very many possibilities to change this duration, and indeed it can be longer. And thus, given that there were people who were living for about 400 million years before Nokodemion, a lot of them had already gone out of their physical lives and were either in the half material and moved on into the pure spirit planes. So, the High Council, one of the High Councils anyway that we know of that the Plejaren consult with, is actually located in the Andromeda Galaxy. And Nokodemion spirit form spent 56 million years in the High Council, and then had moved on actually into the lowest of the pure spirit planes, and those planes are called the Arahat Athersata, which has many levels to it, where he spent 8.7 million years, or his spirit form did. After Nokodemion spirit form had been in the Arahat Athersata for the 8.7 million years, the AA turned to the Patali level for help. The Patali is the highest of the pure spiritual levels. After an unknown amount of time, a determination was made with the involvement of the High Council to create a universal prophet and to entrust this mission to the spirit form of Nokodemion. Nokodemion's spirit form had the option to do this or to not do it, but he did feel a great responsibility for the calamitous course his people's ancestors had gone off on, and wanted to do what he could in order to rectify things. The duration of the entire process took 1.2 billion years, this whole transitional decision-making process, before his spirit form was returned to the material universe via the High Council. So I guess he went back, spent time in High Council, and then transitioned back to the material planes to begin the reincarnation process of births and deaths. Here's an excerpt from Contact Report 238, May of 1991, which talks further about Nokodemion's sense of responsibility and why he felt he had to come back to the material planes. 681. Thus, Nokodemion was faced with the choice of leaving his peoples to degenerate into universal monsters or command a halt to their murderous and power-hungry deeds. Naturally, he decided to command a halt, and accordingly, he issued his decree. This was based on his sense of justice and his loyalty to creation. Accordingly, he sought a solution which was anchored in the powers of the creational laws and recommendations. But in the meantime, back on throughout the universe, chaos was erupting. Many of the direct physical descendants of Nokodemion's ancestors who did not choose to continue in the spreading of the mission's teaching led lives of Ausartungen, which is a German word for great degeneration. Let's just say it, getting very badly out of the good human nature is a longer way of saying it. Over millions of years, countless generations, and through countless alterations, changes, and projections by unevolved personalities devolved. And the spiritual teaching was irretrievably altered in order to abuse power and falsely lead people to enslavement and depravity. Over millions of years, his ancestors developed technologies and traveled out through the universe looking for new planets and galaxies to settle, whilst continuing their murderous and treacherous course. And with the turn to evil and degenerated behaviors, they compromised not only the livelihood of those in their galaxy, but with their excesses, with their technological advancements, they also delayed their own growth and the lives and endangered the lives of others in other galaxies. And so they delayed their growth throughout wide expanses of the universe. And this led to an actual freezing of the creational teaching, and where it lay fallow for about 7 million years. So, anyway, now we're back to, he's back. It's now about 8.4 billion years ago, before Emmanuel, and Nokodemion spirit form returns to the material universe, embarks on the longest journey in order to start this rectification. In the ensuing approximately 7 billion years, this history includes wars, subjugation, annihilations of peoples, destroyed planets, technological advancements, intergalactic pursuits and relocations, etc. So this presentation attempts to glean out some excerpts from some contact reports that deal with his activities amongst these histories. There's huge histories, contact reports that go into great detail of the comings and goings, and it just goes on and on. In many of the contact reports, the exact times aren't clear, and due to Billy's sometime incorrect downloading of the symbols for billion versus millions, there are some inconsistencies. So that's all stuff that needs to be corrected and will be corrected over time. Contact report 238 again. Ta spoke of the measures that Nokodemion took when he came back. First, in the course of only a few decades, he established gigantic armies which are of an exclusively android nature. Then he armed them with all conceivable weapons and robots, whereby hard-hitting armies arose, sworn singly and alone to Nokodemion's high command. The single leaders of the individual armies and troops finally were taken over and managed by the leaders and more experienced of the different planets, whose governments united and were able to defend themselves against the criminal and unhesitatingly murdering conquerors. With these war-experienced ones and leaders stemming from many different planets, and together with the robots and weapons built with the help of governments and with the androids, Nokodemion constructed a multinational peacekeeping troop. So veterans instantly appeared everywhere and fought the criminal conquerors or imprisoned them when these led to their conquering campaigns. Where these led to their conquering campaigns. Within fewer than 8 years, all the criminal peoples were in the custody of multinational peacekeeping troops and deported to a distant planet that was hermetically barricaded and guarded so that nobody could escape, even if anyone possessed flying machines capable of space travel. In conformity with the law of logical force, Nokodemion issued the decree that both sexes of the people were ordained to sterility in a lawful and humane way. And thus the order and decree was passed through the engagement of the Arahat Athersata Leva, and those who passed away in the course of time to a natural death should not be ordained a reincarnation. Rather, that their spirit forms had to stay as long in the realm of the other side until they, one day, through a new decree of Nokodemion, could again find an existence in human bodies. However, this had to continue for a very long time. In addition, led thereto that almost all knowledge had to escape out of the storage banks of these personalities, and new personalities were created through the collective consciousness block. Thus, this process of exhausting the greatest part of the knowledge stored in the storage banks continued for almost 4 billion years, before Nokodemion, with the help of the Arahat Athersata level, again called these aforementioned spirit forms, and newly ordered them into the human bodies. And I'll just take a short break here. And called the aforementioned spirit forms and newly ordered them into human bodies, indeed in his newly engendered and created peoples who found their origins 8 billion years ago on Lassan, which is located in the proximity of Nisan, on the other side of the central sun of our Milky Way galaxy, yet in the Arkan dimension. Approximately 8 billion years ago, his spirit form was no longer known as Nokodemion, but rather was the first time he was reborn into a human being named Henoch. Thereby Henoch, on a far distant planet in a distant galaxy, founded the so-called Henoch line, and he also created new peoples and thus founded his mission and tasks under that name. During these times, a group of 144,228 helpers free-willingly dedicated themselves to helping him move the mission forward. There were numerous times, at least 8, where this number of 144,228 people lived at the same time as Nokodemion/Henoch incarnations in order to help with the mission. These groupings of helpers would have been born as different spirit forms that coincided with the millennia within which they incarnated. More information about the many appearances of various groupings of 144,228 can be found in the 650th Contact Report on Monday, April 4th, 2016. In Bernadette's book, she stated a number of times about that his spirit form goes back to the High Council and back to the Arahat numerous times. So this had to be clarified because as far as we know, this event happens only once. So what we found out from Christian's booklet, which is this, is that this return was out of the pure spiritual level. The further communing, this is what they would call a communing with a high council and the Arahat, took place in the form of a spiritual energy impulse wandering, quote unquote, is how it was termed. That's what Billy called it, which can be understood as a process in which a communicative, impulsive, spiritual energy connection took place between Nokodemion and the high council level and the Arahat Athersata levels. This can be likened to a form of telepathy. At times, the spirit form stayed on the other side for great, great periods of time. So there were sort of big chunks of time where he was doing the mission and big times where he just didn't reincarnate. So maybe that allots for these sort of special chunks of time. And now we're getting a bit closer. Now we're coming into 1.3 billion years ago. The latest time of the Henok return, so this was one of these times, from a long period spent on the other side, was another start of a significant period of incarnations. And once again, he gathered his peoples around him. Out of the Nokodemion Henok teaching, two main groups resulted. Those acting in a good manner according to struggles for peace that resulted into freed peoples and planets and living a great life. And they initially made their way to the Lyran star system, which is in the Arkan space-time continuum and not to be confused with the early Lyran galaxy where Nokodemion originated, and settled there on this Lyran star system. However, first they'd settled in various other worlds and systems of foreign galaxies for more than 1 million years, and there further war actions had arisen, many space-wide migrations of peoples, and they all finally ended up in this space-time continuum, including that of the Plejaren and some of the people who eventually came to Earth. The second line of people who split off from this original group 1.2 billion years ago, they went in a different direction. They also emigrated to other galaxies, but lost their knowledge of where they had come from. They lost that for 70 million years, and they fabricated a whole new history. And that had nothing to do with the truth, or only a very small part. As well, many races belong to these, as with the Lyran, that they also had arrived to a peaceful state, but such a peaceful state that they became quite defenseless against aggressors, much sooner than the old Lyran had. They settled in the Sirius galaxy, also in Arkan, and developed to a high level whereby they were able to create new life themselves. They did gene manipulations in new races in order to defend themselves. So that's what they did. They sort of did these gene manipulations, created these people, gave them shorter lives, made them very aggressive, and they were their armies. But then these people started to rise up and wanted to attack their creators and take over because they were aggressive, and their creators weren't. So anyway, long history. The creators wanted to start to eliminate these aggressors who were turning on them, and when the ones that were created realized this, they took off. And so another whole long history of people going fleeing out throughout the universes happens. Now we're going to jump up to a mere 12 million years ago. At that time, it was decided by Arahat Athersata that one of these 144-228 groups of people, who, according to creational laws, would have been moving on into higher levels of the High Council, would have moved on into the spiritual planes, would be held back in their evolution, and they would not go on, and that they would stay in order to help out with the mission in the millions of years to come. So, and I guess they had willingly volunteered to do this too, so all was good. And so a type of evolutionary stepping back was affected upon these people, so they stayed on the other side for 4 million years. And the storage of their qualities and the values of their personalities and their consciousness block and everything that they had learned remained in the overall consciousness block, which is a form of a storage system. And 4 million years, thus 8 million years ago, they came back to help with the mission. 389,000 years is when the mission-related space travelers arrived on Earth, coming from Malona, which is our present-day asteroid belt, and that's another long story, and Mars. They came from Malona and Mars. Samyaza was the leader of this group, and he was a reincarnation of the Henok Nokodemion spirit form. He came with this large group, including the group of the 144-228, and they were the ones loyal to the mission, to settle here. They intermixed with human beings that were living on the earth already and found new joiners who also made commitments to the ongoing support of through future incarnations as well. And the rest of the history now is based on Earth. So, 15,200 years ago. A part of the original 144-228, however, did not uphold their commitments to the mission, which led to great misery for the Earth's inhabitants. And about 1,000 of the culpable ones were deported to other planets and taught anew over many incarnations. All this history from the beginning of Nokodemion billions of years ago to the space travelers coming to Earth is part of this four time periods referred to earlier. And so just to give you an overview, Patrick McKnight from a FIGU-based group out of the US called The Creational Truth compiled this line drawing lineage chart that follows Nokodemion's spirit form. A link to this lineage chart from the Creational Truth website can be found in the YouTube description to this video. It's broken down into the 4 different representative ages through which Nokodemion's spirit form incarnated. I made a copy of it myself and blew it up and put it onto a poster, so you need a magnifying glass because it's just like, I don't know what the font is, -2 or something, to actually go through all this stuff. It's amazing. So you guys can look at this later if you like. Yeah, so this first section of this chart, which is here, though it's the smallest of size on the overall chart, it actually represents the greatest amount of the time span of Nokodemion spirit form's journey. He was out in space, and it includes his transition between Arahat Athersata and his return, and so I'm guessing about 99.9% of his entire time was in this first little section. 13,500 years ago, before Emmanuel, this is when they started the next time period called the Middle Later Time. And this is when the first of 3 Henoch spirit forms bearing prophetic personalities, all with the name Henoch, also known as Enoch, E-N-O-C-H, in our history, our earthbound history, appears. And like Henoch, this name also means the wise man of time, or the initiate. This marks the beginning of the second time period, as I said, this middle later time. And though this prophet Henoch is not part of the sevenfold spirit lineage, he served as a teacher only for the far away traveled people coming from outer space who were still coming and going at that point. And yeah, so this was also the case as was the case with the old Henoch and the old Nokodemion. Also at that same time, the previously deported former loyal ones from out of the 144-228, who had been sent off to other planets to try to get their act together, they returned from basically a 1,700-year banishment to Mars or wherever they went, who in the meantime had free willingly committed themselves to make right the previously evoked wrongs their former personalities had wrought upon the Earth humans. However, yet again, they fell into their old ways, and again further injustices followed. And at this time, an actual codex was created. It was an agreement. It was formed by these fallible ones in order to hamper further miscarriages of justice by those bad seeds of the 144-228, which was to last another approximately 13,500 years. So this codex came to an end in our lifetime. Here we are. This is the first prophet of the sevenfold prophet lineage. About 4,000 years after the Enoch, the second Enoch of our earth-based history appears, who is the first. This one appears, who is the first in the lineage. He served to bridge the transition from Enoch's spacefaring mission bringers to the actual start of the terrestrial-based mission. And he was designated purely for the earthly mission. He was the only prophet in the lineage who appeared in this middle later time. Henoch was the son of a man named Cretan, who was a Plejaren. The Henoch prophecies were recounted by Quetzal in Contact Report 215, February 87. The English version can be found in the back of Guido Moosbrugger's book, this book, there's a whole thing in here, the Henoch prophecies at the back. It's quite amazing. And so what was I going to say here? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I just lost my place. Which slide are we on? Yeah. And Still They Fly, the name of the book. After Henoch, Enoch, after this guy, the third Henoch, Enoch appeared, and that happened about 4,000, 5,000 years after the second one. Who was the first? It's all a bit confusing. He was a carrier of the same spirit form. He was also a prophet, the third one, but he wasn't exactly belonging to the sevenfold lineage, but he did carry forward the teaching. We don't have any pictures of him. So, here's just an overview of the middle later period, which you can see the yellow box is Henoch 2. Here we are with the second prophet of the lineage, Elijah, or Eliah. He was the first prophet out of 5 who were bound to be living in this period of what they now call the other time. He was the son of Josias and was born in Gilead, Tisbisia, which is situated in Jordan. He didn't have any family, as reported when Billy noted it in a conversation with Samyazi in Contact 23 of June 1975. In a later contact with Ta, was written, Elijah brought the true teaching of the creation and its laws and recommendations, which was thoroughly misunderstood, however, by all the Jewish peoples. As this also happened with all the other prophets and their teachings, and indeed up to the prophet Emmanuel. And interestingly, it's noted that Elijah had the joy to go in a beam ship. He was flown up to Srinagar in Kashmir at one point on April 7, 842 BC. After his death, his spirit form stayed on the other side for only 8 years and came back as Isaiah, who lived for 770, how many years did he live? 82 years. He was the son of a man named Amos and was born in Sidon, which was an ancient Phoenician port city, also known as Sidonia, and is located south of present-day Beirut in Lebanon. Then there's not a whole lot of information about Isaiah that I could really find in the contact notes, but I didn't want to go into great detail anyway, this is too long. After his life, his spirit form spent only 28 years on the other side before coming back as Jeremiah. There's a lot more stuff on Jeremiah. And contact 229 with a Plejaren man named Quetzal, June 31st, 89. It was written that Jeremiah, and I just a little bit more information before I go along. Jeremiah was the son of the high priest Hilkias, born in a place called Anathoth, I'm not lisping, which is outside of Jerusalem. And here's a small excerpt from that contact, where Quetzal is quoting Jeremiah. When the prophet of the new time spreads his teaching, which is going to be Billy, the time of the great transformation has begun. Very many human beings will be suffering from hunger and thirst, while some human beings lose their lives due to extremely high temperatures. Many others will turn blue due to extreme cold and will be plagued by great waters. In general, the human being deteriorates into being afraid of events occurring in nature, and many would like to see another world. And many lapse into fear because the world's powerful rulers degenerate in a worst form of inhumanity, wage wars in a vicious manner in order to seize countries and mineral resources. Ring a bell? They will be the hypocrites who are audacious enough to claim that they act in the name and command of a god in order to consolidate their greed for power. That's just a small little thing. Jeremiah's were predictions. They weren't prophecies. Billy actually says these actually aren't prophecies, but rather predictions, which will therefore definitely fulfill themselves under all circumstances. We're seeing it now. Before the Nokodemion Henoch spirit form returned as the next prophet, 580 years elapsed. However, within that time, before the next prophet lineage came on, and that prophet number 3 was to come along, 2 notable Greek teachers came along who had the spirit form of Nokodemion. with Socrates. So he came along at 89 years after the death of Jeremiah. He was considered one of the founders of Western philosophy. Most of his work is better known by the written dialogues he had with his famous pupil Plato. Plato then passed on Socrates' teachings to his own famous pupil Aristotle, who was also Nokodemion spirit form bearing. So that's pretty interesting. He was born a scant 15 years after the death of Socrates. So in the meantime, Plato in the meantime was sort of bridging the gap and taught him, and on they went. Anyway, 322 years after Aristotle, we have number 5 in the lineage, Immanuel, aka Jesus Christ. And he was actually born 2 years before the reported birth due to erroneous calendar keeping that we've happened after this. There were some changes, which we won't go into either. His father was Gabriel, who was an ET of Plejaren origin. Mother was Mary of terrestrial origin, betrothed to Joseph, who agreed to raise Emmanuel as his own. And Emmanuel lived a long life, which we all know about, and he died in Srinagar, India. The name JC was ascribed to Emmanuel hundreds of years later by the Greeks, referring to Jesus Christos, Jesus being adopted from the Latin version of Jesus, Joshua, and Christos was the name Greeks gave to all the gods. Has also been said that Christos had to do with the cross, and so could also have been Joshua of the cross. There's many various versions floating around there for why his name became Jesus Christ. Then, we're going on now to the next, the prophet of the lineage, number 6. Oh, and by the way, just go back here for a second. That line drawing was done by the Plejaren, and it's actually a pretty good representation, apparently, of what Emmanuel looked like. It is known that Muhammad was in contact with an extraterrestrial from the Plejares. He was an Ishwish, and his name was Gospod or Allah. Ishwish means king of knowledge. Muhammad was the last prophet of the other time. Muhammad's teachings was mostly by word of mouth, and not a lot was written down, unfortunately. And so thus a lot was turned into erroneous scripts via false understandings and or malicious changes that were made, and eventually they all subverted the truth. And between Muhammad and the last prophet were some actual, the last prophet being Billy now, there were a lot of more notable personages from our history who were also enlivened by Nokodemion. So we'll just go briefly through who some of these people were. Just before we do that, though, just going into the other times. So this is just a synopsis of the 5 prophets there, which is a little bit hard to see right now, but you can look at that on the chart. So here are some of the other personalities. Faust, 848 years after Muhammad. He was a German alchemist, astrologer, magician of the German Renaissance. Next was Galileo, which was only after, on the other side, 23 years after Faust's death. Galileo, he was Italian, astronomer, physicist, engineer, philosopher, and he was known as the father of science and the scientific method. 114 years after the death of Galileo was Mozart. And I think we all know who Mozart was. He was a famous composer, musician, came from Austria. And then only 18 years after the death of Mozart, Mendelssohn came. He was out of Germany. He was also a famous composer, pianist, organist, and conductor. So 18 years after the death of Mozart, he was born. His lifespan just reached across into the beginning of the transition period from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, which occurred in 1844. From Christian Freiner's book, he talks about, with regard to the, just going back to the Mozart and the Mendelssohn's lives, their entire evolutionary and progressive work refers to the general and very important influences of music on the human being, whereby the musical stimulation, effect, and scope of power of the effectiveness of the musical influences on the human being with regard to his/her forms of morality, ethos, ethics, and customs, and thus, of course, with regard to their pattern of behavior, their life, how they shape their life, and their lifestyle are of immense importance. And Billy has written a lot about the importance of music and its effects on us. So it's interesting. Then 28 years after Mendelssohn, there's still yet another person widely known, and that's Rasputin, born in the Siberian region of Russia. He was a mystic and a self-proclaimed holy man and healer. He was close to the family of the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, and he healed from a distance the Tsar's only son who suffered from hemophilia. So he had advanced consciousness abilities as well. Very interesting. I've read some books about Rasputin. Interesting. And then, just as a sum up here, all these men, there's maybe another person, because people have alluded that there's possibly another person that lived in that time period. I'm not sure who. And Christian Frainer said, yes, possibly. So you'd have to sort of go back into your history to figure out who this person could have been that they're not saying yes or yay or nay to. All these men had special tasks and capabilities which brought progressive values for the next centuries in many ways, which as such were not to be recognized right then. However, they were significant, and with the respective sciences being more rational, more comprehensively researched, and newly valuable, as well as progressive future teaching realizations were gained from them. So, in sort of retrospect, these valuations were realized, and the rapid development into the modern times could find its purposeful progress through these people. Anyway, only 21 years after the death of Rasputin, Billy Meier's born. And he is the seventh and the last prophet in this lineage. His birth date coincides with the beginning of the second half of the transition period from into the age of Aquarius out of Pisces. He's the last, and he is known, he's the one and only prophet of this new age, new time, Aquarian age. Because of the great value of the spirit form of Nokodemion, the spirit potential potency has a very great value, but in order to live amongst the people now, at our state of evolution, his spirit potential had to be what they called throttled back and adjusted down to the general level of the spiritual evolution of those on Earth. The spirit potential today of Billy's spirit form capabilities is now held at 27.2% of what he's actually would have been capable of if he weren't stuck amongst us. He's been having ongoing contacts, as we all know, since he was 5 years old, with other descendants. Since he was 5 years old, with other descendants of his previous space-faring peoples. These are the Plejaren, and with other ETs who belong to their federation. So this is just the sum up of the last section, which is the densest of all of them. So yeah, that's interesting. And then, and just as in the past lives, Nokodemion spirit form, when incarnated as a truth bringer, people gathered around. And they gathered around Billy free willingly in order to help him with his mission. This is an old picture of the group of members that were around him back in Switzerland, I think back in the 70s. This is pictures from. Many have died or left or transitioned to various things, and more people have come in since this one. Christian Frainer is there, who's going to come here and be with us next month. He is the one up in the very back row, like third from the left, standing like this. That's Christian, so that's him with hair. Sorry, Christian.
White shirt? Yeah.
The white shirt. Yeah, he's besides Hans Losendorfer who's on his right. Anyway, so there were people that lived close to Billy's home in Hinterschmidrudi at the time. It's about 24 years ago. They are called the Core Group of 49. Most likely they are part of the lineage of the relatively recent 144228 people, the helpers of the day of old. Since then, some have died, some have left. Throughout the world, there are many others who are also probably part of that previous group, or of those who joined later, including a handful of small nation groups, including the peoples of the Landesgruppes and interesting groups that have formed to help with this information. And we become daughter groups to the Swiss Mother Center and are able to do this out of our volunteering and willingly wanting to take on the responsibility. And there will always be new people coming through because they recognize the truth. And Nokodemion's history is known throughout the universe, and because of this, Billy has visitors coming from the far reaches of space to meet him to this day. His books and teaching are studied by a tiny percentage of those incarnated on the planet Earth now, only a tiny, but studied by many more throughout the universe, primarily within the Federation to which the Plejaren belong. The present-day Federation of the Plejaren, whose peoples are part of the direct descendants belonging to the old Nokodemion peoples, is made up of around 154 various nations out of various galaxies who extend across these two time-space dimensions that we know of. Manara from Contact 393 in 2005 wrote, and there are many other nations who are not descendants of the Nokodemion line who also teach, read, and study your books, talking to Billy. 1995 is when the Plejaren bases actually packed it up and left. However, since then we have found out from Christian that they have recently come back because of the tenuous times we live in. They won't be able to actually do anything, but they're here just to watch over, I suppose, in case, we blow up something. If we're about to the point where we're going to blow up and affect the solar system, which will affect the galaxy, they may intervene. So, from the Q A booklet compiled by Christian, this little one here, he writes, the further new following personalities, because this is some of the questions that came up from the last lineage of Nokodemion, will remain conscious of their entire missionary knowledge in their future lives, and indeed until the time of finding their way back to the Arahat Athasata level in the year 3999. It was determined that the following personalities, who would continue to keep all their missionary knowledge in regard to the teaching of the truth, life, and spirit, however, no longer in a prophet proclaimer manner, but only to be active in other forms, unrecognized, and in the background as personalities originating from Nokodemion lineage. They will not proclaim themselves, and therefore it's a form of fail-safe, so that people who do come along in the future and say, I am the reincarnation of Nokodemion, Henok, etc., it'll be known that they are false claimers. Billy's spirit form will remain on the earth. The new personalities will remain on the earth of the sevenfold will remain on the earth, but these will leave it temporarily because these personalities will continue to have a connection with the Plejaren. 2029 is when the Plejaren return to their space-time dimension and will no longer work on the earth in any form. In the year 3999. In the year 399, this is from Christian's booklet, all spirit forms of all the members or those loyal to the mission who contributed to and have worked their way up in their evolutionary stages stipulated by Arahat Athasata level will leave the earth and will reincarnate into another world, in new personalities, into a humanity in that other world that is of a higher evolution of this planet. And subsequently, these new personalities will resume their evolutionary path as wise human beings according to the creational law of evolution. And they will eventually enter into the High Council and in the Arahat Athasata level. According to the Arahat Athasata level, also the Nokodemion spirit form is predestined or arranged for in the time of the year 3999, but not in the manner as the members of the mission, whose spirit forms will leave the earth. But he will go directly at that time from a physical incarnation to Arahat Athasata. He will not go back through the High Council. So that's what happens in 399 with his spirit form. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. So these are just a few interesting questions. There are quite a few questions in this booklet, but there's some ones I thought that were interesting. This one, of course, what happens to our twin creation? Did it have a prophet, or is Billy their prophet? So it talks about our twin creation has a universe, one of its 7 material belts. It's called the Tao. And that we know of, and it belongs to our twin. It's the highest developed peoples in the Dal are a race known as the Sonair. They've been living in peace since time immemorial. From Christian Frainer's booklet, quote, also with them a prophethood and a proclaimerhood arose at very early times, however in a different way than in the DERN universe. Because with the Sonair peoples, two manner of prophethood emerged at very early times, namely a prophetess and a prophet. One, the female proclaimer was called Nese, N-E-S-E, while the male prophet was called Arkan, had the name Alkan. From the Sonair peoples, a group called the Timars split off and formed their own people's lineage, whereby they continued the teachings of the old wise ones, Nese and Alkan. In later times, they mingled with distant ancestors from ancient Plejaren races who had entered into the Dal universe. They found a way to get through. They had opened up a portal into our twin creation. And these ancient people teamed up with the Timars. This had the result that the teaching of Nokodemion, brought by the Plejaren into that universe, also reached Dimars and the Sonair. And because this doctrine harmonized with that of Nisa and Alkan, both largely identical doctrines, were combined and henceforth taught among the people of the Timar and Sonair, and was abided by to the present time, and will undoubtedly also be observed into the future for all time. Basically, it can thus be said that the prophetic, heraldic teaching of the Sonair and Timars is identical with the teaching of Nokodemians. Another question. Why are all the prophets of the Nokodemian lineage male? The fact that the Nokodemian prophet proclaimer lineage was and is quite male finds its reason in the fact since all beginnings, and at the time of Nokodemion, that the degeneration of the male sex had become so depraved that no possibility existed that a prophetic work could have been realized through a female personality. A female, quote unquote, would have had absolutely no chance throughout all times, and would, to put it mildly, have been disgraced, defiled, humiliated, soiled, and desecrated by the male world. Foreseeing this, the Arahat Athersata level took this fact into account, and everything was thus directed that concerning the prophetic proclaimer lineage of Nokodemion, this could only be of a male gender throughout. This was due since time immemorial to the extremely severe and viciously negative degeneration of the men, for whom women were nothing more than oppressed slaves and objects of use, which will be sustained long into the future in this wise. Isn't that a wonderful thing to know? What about these 144228? So what about the extension of the mission times? This was partially answered in that other one. It's saying the extension of the mission time of those loyal ones who further evolved into the half-spirit level high council was slowed down or influenced by the Arahat Athersata, in order they can meanwhile support the mission, herald far longer in the mission than the standard duration of 46 million years in the material world. So regarding them, is their future duration of activity synchronized with that of the universal proclaimer herald, or does it end earlier, whereupon new loyal ones are then found and become committed? So what happened? The answer to that was that from the year 399, those loyal ones, they go on to this other planet, and they will continue with the duration, within the duration of the 40 to 60 million years of the what has to be the evolution period, but it probably will go faster for them because they will be further along in their evolution before they go on into the Arahat and Athersata, but that will continue when they're in the new world after 3999. And it's also said the new members or the loyal ones in relation to continuation of the mission will no longer appear, because from the year 399, as is determined by the level Arahat Athersata, the humanity of the earth must autonomously develop itself in every respect according to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, or perish. So once they're gone, this planet will be on its own, and it's up to us, the people remaining here, to carry on that teaching. So hopefully by then we'll have learned some stuff. Were the higher spiritual levels already populated during the first 46 trillion years? So that was a question question was, I seem to remember that you once said that the levels High Council, Arahat, Athasata, etc. already existed before the first entry of the first human spirit form, because the structural construction of the universe by the creation universal consciousness took place at the very beginning. Does this mean that the levels High Council to Patali already existed during the first 46 trillion years? And the answer was that all levels from Arahat, Athasata to Patali in creational universe consciousness are fundamentally in existence and contain the necessary basic energetic evolutive impulses, which, however, lie fallow until they become activated through new spiritual energetic impulses flowing into them from the outside, as this occurs with any creational universal consciousness, which emerges as the lowest form of creation from the absolute absolutum, or can also come from an creation, and is the only form of creation that has the material belt. And as I said before, we happen to be from the absolute absolutum. Was this series of the 7 prophets a predetermined thing, and does it happen often? The series of 7 prophets is not creationally and lawfully predetermined. For what has arisen in this regard with the Nokodemion lineage was of necessity due to the badly gotten out of control behavior of the human beings who went on out into the earth after that. So that's basically, this was once a unique thing that happened, this lineage. These are 2 of the books where the teaching of the prophets are widely known to be in. Basically the 6 prophets, 6 of them, not Emmanuel, are in the Goblet of the Truth, and the Talmud Emmanuel carries forth the specific teachings of Emmanuel, and of course the teaching is throughout all the books and throughout all the contexts as well. It's interwoven into everything that Billy writes. And of course you guys probably know about this. This is an interesting book, Spiritual Teaching Symbols. These are some of the about 600 and odd numbers of teaching symbols that were downloaded by Billy out of 52 million. 52 million would be a pretty big book. So just wrapping up here, the cedar tree. This is the symbol, the picture that Billy chose for the cover of his book. Translation of this saying here is, the cedar symbolizes durability, stability, longevity, strength, and undyingness. The consciousness preserved before the decay. And it's a good representation of the indestructiveness of the spirit form and the steadfastness of Nokodemion's dedication to helping human beings move forward in their evolution. Through Billy's abilities to access his spirit form storage banks, so much knowledge has been brought to the fore that we have never known before in the history of this planet. Through the documentation of his over 700 contact reports with his loyal friends from the Plejares, the Dal universe, and from throughout various dimensions, plus over 60 books, in addition to the spiritual teaching course, infinite knowledge and wisdom has been forever stored in written form to inform and free humanity in the millennia to come. For that, we are all extremely grateful for this extraordinary being who walks the earth at the same time as ourselves. This person who has worked ceaselessly and entirely to bring us the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the spirit, and the teaching of the life. When he departs this life, his words will live on, and it will be up to each of us to take up the torch and keep the flame of knowledge burning in order to cast light into delusion and untruth. And I thank you very much. That's it. Any questions?
What time did you start speaking?
Probably about 2. His question was, what time did I start speaking for the tape? So, yes, David.
At the beginning of the discussion, you showed us or talked about how the moon came into our solar system.
Oh, yeah.
From the ANKAR.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot about that too, but I guess the question is, if there's a dimensional gate between the two,
mm-hmm.
how did the destroyer and the broken bits of one planet that came over. Our moon was one of those bits. How did it come to negate, I guess, is my question. I did read how there was one of their suns imploded or exploded.
Yeah.
And that tore a hole in time. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe that's how it crossed the dimension.
That I cannot answer. I have no idea. I think this gate must be just some existing physical thing out there that you don't need to have technology to go through. It just flukily went into it.
But naturally it happened instead of man-wise, somehow.
Possibly. I know that there was this explosion of a great sun, and that tore a big hole in the fabric of space-time somehow. I don't know if that was the actual dimensional portal that arose from that. Yeah.
In my business of information technology, some questions always lead to more questions.
Yes, they do. There's many unanswerable questions in this. Yeah. Yeah. So that's, yeah, Robert?
I was thinking, people in this room studying fungibility stuff and getting very tuned in and a little more information than they generally carry. Then we pass on, then we reincarnate, coming back in with this extra information. So there would be on the planet several sub-spiritual forms acting out a very proper existence. Yeah, I worded that correctly, but we went over your head.
I'm not sure what the question actually is, so.
It's just
Hypothesizing?
People that study spiritual traditions really well.
Yes.
Then when they die and come back, they're already ahead of the game, and they tend to add to what they spiritually learned in the last.
Yeah, I guess every life you're going to gain knowledge and wisdom. Some of it might be factual, some of it might be human created knowledge that could be true or not true. There's all kinds of traditions of spirituality that have maybe come out of original traditions that came from Nokodemion or from other planets, or that have arose and have migrated and transmuted, and they still have an essence of truth in them, but there's also a whole lot of other stuff and what you call them, beliefs that may or may not quite be on the right track, but everyone grows from every life, whether that's spiritual life or not.
That was way better worded than you realized.
Oh, well, that's good, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't have your actual question on tape, but I guess, anyway, so. That was the best we could answer that question. I don't think there's a mic that we have for that. Yes, Carol?
Why did the prophets live wrong? Why is they're not living as wrong
Now?
now? Yeah.
Because the races, those aggressive races, have gone out and propagated and mixed with races, and the spirit forms, especially earthbound, all the humans have been affected by this life-shortening gene, and that's why now the times are shorter. Maybe some of the earlier Henoks and stuff were still living to the 1,000 and beyond years that we're supposed to be, and eventually it will be corrected by our scientists. We will start to live longer lives again, which is maybe not a good thing in this overpopulated world. Yeah, a lot of 1,200-year-old geriatrics. Yeah.
Any idea what the genetic manipulation is?
No, it's something to do with there's some. No, I'm not a genetic scientist, so I can't tell you what that is, but it's we're getting close to finding it out.
It's not something new. We were missing one chromosome, like we only have 23, whereas we're supposed to have 24. Has anybody heard that one?
I can't comment on any missing chromosomes or not.
Last question for me. Aside from the 7 prophets that Nokodemion reincarnates through, or has. With the others, like Faust and Mozart, did they have any communication, or was it told or mentioned? Did they know that they were the Nokodemion reincarnated spirit form, whereas Billy had contact, and so he knows. But
did they consciously know?
Did the lesser reincarnates, did they know that they were reincarnates of the Nokodemion?
So yeah, the question, did the other notable personages that were not prophets have knowledge of their prophetic lineage or their mission-based? I have no idea. I would say maybe subconsciously they would. It hasn't said in these books that they knew about it. You know, you'd think that Rasputin would have some idea because he was, but no, as far as we know, not. Maybe on a subconscious level, but again, that's only something Billy would be able to answer.
Because as I understand it, my spirit form, if you call it a gut feeling or whatever you want to call it, it's helping me along. You know, I'm not regressing, hopefully. I'm here and moving forward.
Yeah.
So I would assume that it's the same for them. It was the same.
Yeah. Robert?
To answer his question, that they were still here up to 1995, as each of these people came to be lost, Mendelssohn. A contingent from the base would probably go out and interface with them and help them get good grounding in their work.
Perhaps. I mean, the Plejaren had been here for a long time, and they would have been aware at all times where the spirit form of Nokodemion was. But whether they were going to them in the beam ships and saying, "Hey, hi, remember you were Nokodemion and you were Hanok and all that stuff," I don't know. But they still yet had their own influences, and also the great works that all these personages did helped humanity to move ahead. So maybe they were impulsed, or they had their own impulses, obviously coming from their own storage banks, being the oldest spirit form in this universe. They're much older than the Plejaren, and indeed they're Nokodemion and Billy teaches them. They have their own. He has their own course for them. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. So yes, Chris.
In the contact reports between Billy and Ta explains something. I mean, looking at our immediate future, Billy is really putting the whole humanity down, and he's saying, well, there's really nothing beneficial in the human race. And then Ta is talking about, and that is not that long ago, when they, in their world, had a similar situation, and there was a sphere that appeared, which infused thoughts into the people that brought them up to a higher level. Did you ever hear about that?
A fear that brought...
A sphere.
Oh, a sphere.
Yeah. Appeared in the sky, and it infused the people with the higher spirit.
I've heard of that. That would be a great thing. Imagine if a sphere appeared on the Earth and all the...
That would be a simple solution.
That would be.
For us, right?
Yeah, perhaps.
Or
would it get all the militaries together to, go out there and start nuking it? It's the other thing. It's depending on our... which would you have, this or this? I mean, our consciousness is on a global scale, is so fear-oriented and so aggressive, and but maybe something like that would turn everyone around. Yeah.
Were we not supposed to develop to a higher level in that Aquarian age?
Yes, we are supposed to, and it's still coming in now. It's still transitioning in until 2029, I believe, which is when it will be in the full force of the Aquarian age will be in effect. And of course, with this transition, it's known that it's really a tumultuous time, and a lot of religions are sprouting up and clamoring to hang on to the old ways, and the wars and the aggression that all just really comes to the fore and really starts to bubble, and then it's going to start, now the light's starting to come in, disinformation is starting to get out, you know, people are becoming more aware of the climate and everything that we're doing. The internet and the technology is all helping to spread the information a lot more. So, you know, those are our positives, but at the same time we have the machinations of the U.S. and their allies and all that kind of thing going on, and the propaganda and misinformation everywhere. So it's a really still a crazy time. But
before that happens, it appears like all life on Earth has to be extinguished.
Almost, or you know, maybe just about all of it. Who knows? It seems like that's the course we're heading in right now, because nobody's really changing their behavior to a great extent.
The date, if you're out there, 2029, that it's too coincidental with also with the apocalypse, or supposed, you know, whether or not it really does hit Earth. If it does, it's been spelled out how it will.
Yeah.
And I think that if it did happen, you know, takes away half the Middle East, that'll wake up people too at the same time. You're going through such a cataclysmic time.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be landing between the Black Sea and the, what other one?
The Black and the
North Sea. So that's more around Poland, Europe.
Which means the whole western side of the continent of Asia is going to be suffered.
Oh.
But that means that your whole area where the old world, you know, Assyria, Babylon, where that's the area, and it's supposed to just be gone.
Wow.
That's the impact area. Then the UK and Spain will split up and become a new continent. If that really, really happens, yes, the world and humankind is going to get shaken up a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's 2029, which it's said it's supposed to have its first pass, or the next pass in 2036. Yeah.
Correct. It's too
So,
coincidental in that time.
I know. Let's hope we all get to live to see that. We all are lucky enough. So I'm thinking that maybe this could be time for a little break, and then we can reconvene, and maybe if people want to stay to do some reading of Goblet of the Truth, you're welcome. We just have about an hour left. So maybe come back in, about 10 minutes, if you like.